So in this video, we're going to be talking about the Greek Dark Age, the period in which the foundations of everything that is to come in Greek history is laid. So with the collapse of the Bronze Age, the civilization of Mycenaean Greece completely falls apart. The Mycenaean economy and society and culture were built around a highly centralized urban industrial system that completely collapses. And in the wake of this disaster, the cities are no longer viable. There's no means of support or life there, and as a result, the people flee the cities. The cities are abandoned, and the peoples of the Aegean move out into the countryside, or in some cases abandon the Aegean environment altogether. And so one of the side effects of this, the civilization collapses, the society and urban customs fall flat, and with that are gone all of the urban technologies. Not merely industrial production, but writing, which is an urban phenomenon. It arises with the development of cities, and is abandoned with the abandonment of cities as well. It is, primarily associated with highly centralized governments and highly centralized societies. It is most strongly associated with advanced trade and commerce and complicated systems of government and institutionalized religion, all of which are urban phenomena. And so when people revert to being scattered across the countryside in decentralized living environments, in farming villages spread far and wide across the Aegean landscape, writing is one of the things that's abandoned, along with everything else that belonged to their urban, industrial, centralized past. And so, as a result, the thing that characterizes the Dark Age, Dark Age does not mean decline. It does not mean, a reversion to a primitive barbarian life or anything like this. The phrase Dark Age is not designed to be pejorative in that way. The phrase Dark Age means simply that it is dark to us because we cannot hear them. Their voice is lost to us because the information that comes from writing is not available for the people of this time. And so we have this entire period from the collapse of the Bronze Age around 1100 BCE to the period at which the Aegean world emerges from the Dark Age, and we can start to hear them again because they've developed a new writing system and are starting to leave records and relics of their expression, and the manifestations of their culture in writing. And so, from that point onward, we can start to hear the Greeks again, and the following periods are the periods that manifest the best known aspects of Greek culture. But when the Greeks come out of the Dark Age, all of the basic elements of Greek society that the Greek society is known for in the Archaic period and the most famous the Classical period, the climax of Greek culture, all of the essential elements of that culture are already present, have already been developed and perfected during the period in which we cannot see them. And Greek history, as we will see, carries on further into the Hellenistic period, the period after Alexander the Great conquers both the Greeks and the Persians to the east, and ultimately the arrival of the Romans. For our purposes, we're looking at the period between the collapse of the Bronze Age, what the Egyptians call the period of calamities, and the and the Aegean recovery of writing is sometime during the 8th century BCE. And so this transition is something that involves a lot more layers and a lot more nuances than simply the abandonment of the cities and the reversion to a dispersed and rural lifestyle. The thing that is generally characterized as a decline is often is somewhat distorted in the way that we can look at the record. So the Aegean world certainly loses the industrialized palace economy and the highly centralized, highly stratified vertical culture of the Mycenaean cities, where classes are stacked on top of each other, and this is what we mean by a vertical culture. And as a result, the society of the Dark Age has essentially been leveled. The need for all of these very strictly hierarchical classes in urban society, the laborers and the skilled laborers and the specialized workers and the priests and the nobles and the king and so forth. All of that stuff is no longer necessary. What we have instead is a society in which people own farmland, people own property, and that gives you a shared stake in the community. This, in other words, is the beginning of the essential Greek idea of the participation of the individual, of the citizen, as standing side by side with other citizens as shared stakeholders in the community. The whole idea of depopulation. There are a number of things going on here. So the essential idea is supposedly the Aegean world is massively depopulated during this period. This is actually not nearly as true as might appear at first blush. For a number of reasons. First of all, there's a huge migration going into the Aegean world. This is the Dorian wave of Indo-European migration. There's essentially two massive waves of Indo-European Greek migration into the Aegean world. The first wave gives us the Mycenaeans, and so that happens partway through the Bronze Age, and the Mycenaeans, somewhere around 2000 or so BCE, the Mycenaeans arrive and begin to supplant the Minoans, which is more or less accomplished by around 1600 or so. So the first wave of Indo-European Greeks that arrive in the Aegean world is the Mycenaeans. And the second wave arrives around 1100 to 1000 BCE. These are the Dorians. And the Dorians populates the more westward areas of the Aegean world, and are in particular the ancestors of the Western Greeks of later phases, including the Spartans. The Greeks to the east that includes the Athenians and the peoples that live, for the most part on the Aegean islands and the western shores of Anatolia. These are now referred to as the Ionians. So there is migration out of the Aegean world as a result of the collapse of the Bronze Age, but there's also migration into it. But the sense of depopulation comes mainly from the fact that the cities are abandoned, the people are dispersed to the countryside, and it's very difficult for modern archaeologists to get a clear sense of large populations of people that are dispersed in farming villages around a large mass of territory. It's simply extremely difficult to undertake archaeological systematic discovery of all of these different places and to gain an accurate picture. There's actually been a relatively small number of Dark Age village and town excavations that have been taken place. And so, when people are concentrated in cities, it's very easy to get a strong handle on, how many people are living in this concentrated place, and what their culture is like, and what their relics are, and what their tools and coins and so forth are. But in the conditions of the Dark Age, especially the early Dark Age, um, it's very tough to get a handle on it. And so this is the other reason why it's called the Dark Age. That the Dark Age is dark to us not only in terms of documents, because there aren't any, because there's no writing system, but it's also dark to us in terms of the the archaeological record, because there's much less information. And so as a result, the actual phenomenon of depopulation is actually more a movement of people away from concentrated places into thousands of dispersed communities. What remains the same from the Bronze Age to the Dark Age is the way that life is lived in the countryside. In other words, during the Mycenaean period and any other urban concentrated period, there are huge numbers of people that are just living ordinary lives, farming their lands and interacting with their extended families and local communities and so forth. And this kind of rustic life is only affected by the volatile change that takes place in the city to a limited extent. Things remain, remarkably similar. This is particularly true in terms of rural religion. The communities of the ancient world tend to have a sort of divide between the kind of religion that takes place in the city and that involves interaction with the sort of political community, and the kind of religion that takes place in the countryside. And so the people of the city, during later periods of Greek history, will be actively trying to engage with the official pantheon, Zeus and Aphrodite and so forth and so on. These are gods that are gods understood to interact with human communities as much as anything else, and often you'll see in Greek mythology that it is communities that suffer as much as individuals when the gods are aggrieved. But in the countryside, there tends to be in the Greek world. Later, we'll see this in the Roman world, the Latin world, and elsewhere around the ancient Eastern Mediterranean. A more sort of abstract, more spiritual approach to religion. In other words, there is a sense that there's a that divine spirits are part of the actions of nature. This is a much more basic approach to the human interaction with the divine, as as sort of metaphysical way of understanding the natural world. The people of the countryside tend to have a sense of sort of household gods that are concerned with the agricultural conditions of the immediate vicinity, that are concerned with boundaries and doorways and hearths and this kind of thing, the essential elements of survival in the countryside. And so these kinds of things do not change, and there is a continuity of Aegean culture that allows a persistence of identity through from the collapse of the Bronze Age into this new era. And finally, there's a considerable amount of of development that takes place during the Dark Age, including a number of vital technologies. The Greeks acquire the capacity to manipulate iron during this period. They develop new forms of ceramic decoration, which we'll talk about in a moment, and they develop a number of key aspects of Greek society, which we'll be seeing as we go along. So the Dark Age settlements tend to be not dissimilar to the kinds of settlements we see during the Neolithic. In other words, these are ordinary farming villages that are often built to accommodate a larger family or parts of an extended family, and that are built in tightly associated communities that where the property owners are present to reinforce each other and are more or less on the same footing. The chieftain of a community is likely to have a house that is not necessarily even bigger than anyone else's, but simply has a patio section toward the front that is a gathering place for other members of the community, where decisions can be reached together on what needs to be done for defense and dealing with other crises. One of the things that often comes up with ancient history is that the greatest information that we have about decoration and everyday life comes from ceramics, because ceramics do not rot, and so therefore we have a great deal of it. Where we do not have articles of clothing that have survived, and wooden implements and even the houses beyond foundations that have been excavated and so forth. So we tend to have ceramics. What's interesting about this is that as the people of the Aegean are recovering from the collapse of the Bronze Age, it seems that they are, as they're picking up the pieces, as they are reforming their culture, they're making a deliberate effort to look forward. In other words, what we do not see is a drive to recover the glories of the past. There seems to be, we can almost sense that there is an awareness that the Mycenaean system did not work. And so there is an effort to move in another direction, and this is typified by the kinds of art and aesthetics that we see that are consciously unlike the art and decoration from the Mycenaean period. This develops into what we refer to as the geometric, and the geometric artwork of the Dark Age can be quite elaborate, and it is extremely distinctive. It is a characteristic expression of the Dark Age culture, and the most elaborate of these are clearly designed for an increasingly with increasing capacity for wealth. There's either markets for luxury goods within the Dark Age community, or there's increasing trade going on with surrounding communities in which there is a market for luxury goods. There is also artistic expression that survives. We don't have paintings, we don't have tapestries, we don't have clothing, but certain things like this terracotta centaur, for example, that clearly reflects the geometric aesthetic, but is also evocative and expressive. If you look at simply the expression on this face and the amount of the fact that this is reflective of concepts of of expression, concepts of legend and mythology that are persisting and developing and growing within this community, you can get a hint of the development of the culture, within the period of the Dark Age. The Dark Age is the very opposite of stagnant. The Dark Age is a period of intense development. This is of intense fertility. This is the crucible of the Greek society to come. And we'll continue this in the next video.